Welcome everybody to this great celebration, celebrating 40 years of our own publisher, Mkuki na Nyota. Today, it is a very special celebration. And I say so because we have a whole range of celebrations. We celebrate authors and writers. We celebrate books, and we celebrate launching of books. Occasionally, we also celebrate great editors. But rarely do we celebrate publishers. Yet, a publisher is the hub of the publication wheel. A publisher refines and sometimes redefines what we authors write. A publisher makes our writing intelligible, comprehensible, and pleasurable to read. It is the publisher who makes possible communion and communication among us and between us and between generations. So we need to celebrate our publishers, especially in our part of the world, where publishers are not given the credit they deserve. Mkuki na Nyota and Comrade Walter Bugoya, the founder, is not just another publisher. He is a progressive publisher. He gave a name and fame to publishing in this region. My essay, The Silent Class Struggle, was published by the predecessor of Mkuki na Nyota, Tanzania Publishing House, 50 years ago. And Walter was there. He was in the process of taking over from TPH's former general manager, Hutchinson. My Class Struggles in Tanzania was also published by TPH under Walter's watch. Since then, Walter and I have never left each other. More recently, my Pan-Africanism and Pragmatism was also published by Mkuki na Nyota. Most important of all, our biography of Mwalimu Nyerere, Development as Rebellion, was published in 3 fine volumes last year by Mkuki na Nyota, running into some 1,100 pages. Walter and Mkuki dedicated themselves fully to bring out the biography to a fuller satisfaction. It was the best of our best. Right from the beginning, unlike Mwalimu himself, who used to have his books published by OUP, we, the authors of the biography, were determined that our biography of Mwalimu would be published by a local publisher. And who would that be if not Mkuki na Nyota? And I cannot restrain myself to show you this great product and this great design by Mkuki, of which we are very proud. Hongereni tena.
Yeah.
Before I'm carried away, I guess I should remind myself that I'm not a speaker. I'm only chairing this session. So let me straight away have the honor of introducing our speakers for this evening. First, we'll have Comrade Walter Bugoya, who will be making his presentation. Walter has been in publishing for the last over 50 years. From 1972 to 1991, he was the general manager of Tanzania Publishing House, which was a public company, or what we call parastatal here. In the 1980s, as the winds of privatization gripped us, Walter was prudent enough to register Mkuki and Nyota, which took over TPH in 1991 and continued the progressive tradition established by TPH. Walter has continued progressive publishing since then, with all the ups and downs of publishing business in our part of the world. Walter, wish you many more years of progressive publishing. Our second speaker will be Ngugi wa Thiong'o, our foremost novelist. In my view, what is Semben Usman is to West Africa, Ngugi is to East Africa. He has published many novels and plays, as many of you may know, which have been translated into over 30 languages. His novels convey subtle political messages in the art form, for which he has seen detention in Kenya's maximum security prison and decades-long as exile. Currently, Ngugi is professor at the University of California, Irvine. Whatever I say about our friend and comrade Ngugi would fall far short of what Ngugi has done and accomplished. I would therefore leave it at that. Our third speaker is Chambi Chachage, one of our illustrious young scholars. After doing his postgrad fellowship at Princeton, he has now moved to Carleton University in Ottawa, where he teaches in African studies. Then our speaker is Mary J., who is the former CEO and director of African Books Collective, which is a consortium of African publishers. Walter, in fact, was one of the founding members of ABC. ABC has done a great job in giving African books a visibility and disseminating African books. Our last speaker is Mkuki Goya. He's director of Mkuki and Nyota. He has been the creative director at Mkuki and Nyota since 2009 and has indeed done creative designing of M&N books, example of which I've already shown you. He believes in publishing that form is as important as contents. And I couldn't agree more with him. Mkuki, as you gradually take over the leadership of M&A, our hope is that you will continue the progressive lineage started by TPH. So organizers tell me that each speaker will have 10 minutes and they will keep time. After that, hopefully we'll have enough time for Q&A, and at the end, I will do my brief summing up. So let us start. Walter, please, welcome.
Thank you, Comrade Issa. And thank you very much for the introduction you have done of the participants in the panel. I want to thank them also, and also thank the participants, because your 1 hour being with us is a gift to us as we celebrate 40 years of our our journey in publishing under Mkuki and Nyota imprint. Unfortunately, 10 minutes is really too short to cover 40 years. An average of 1 minute for 4 years. But so I thought the only thing I could do would be to say how we managed to keep on and retain the same reasons we went into publishing for. Relevant books, beautiful books, affordable books, despite the sometimes very, very difficult conditions in which we were doing publishing. I knew when I left TPH that I wanted the company to continue publishing along the same lines as TPH. Basically an eclectic list comprising books on many subjects that I thought would be of interest to Tanzanians and our other friends, also mostly in Swahili and English. I was, and I'm still wedded to the idea that the principle that if a manuscript is of particular historical or cultural significance, I would publish that book even if it did not have the chance to make money. You can understand why that is so. My view is that's how culture can be sustained. As recently, the president of the International Publishers Association, Madame Bodor Kassirin, said, quoted a Greek proverb. It says, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shades they shall never sit. I don't qualify as an old man, as you realize, but I do recognize that what we have planted now, what you have planted now, may give results when I will not be around to enjoy them. The publishing industry, as you know, in Africa is basically textbook publishing because that's the only financially lucrative sector. Unfortunately, I do not have really the skills of a textbook publisher because it's a most complicated business, and you can understand what I mean by that. So I decided that we would do what we had done, which was basically what we call trade publishing. I've written quite a bit about African publishing. And in the most recent and most comprehensive article I co-authored with Mary J. 8 years ago, publishing in Africa from independence to the present day, we examine in detail the practice of the multinationals and point to the major exposed examples of corruption of these multinationals, although one suspects that the numbers are more, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. Although that article is 8 years old, little has changed since then, so it is still useful and relevant. Maria Suriano at Wits University published an article in 2020, that's last year, titled Dreams and Constraints of an African Publisher, Walter Bugoya, Tanzania Publishing House, and Mkuki and Nyota, 1972 to 2020. In this detailed review, she situates me in the nearly 50 years of publishing, giving me credit that I'm not entirely sure I deserve. As being in the heat of the struggle, I tend to look at things one at a time, always not seeing things I could have done better than the record shows. Not publishing textbooks, our main source of manuscripts was the University of Dar es Salaam. But ever since 1985, when Tanzania succumbed to the World Bank and IMF structural adjustment program, which imposed conditionalities for their loans, the impact was strongly felt at the university. In order to make ends meet, professors and lecturers took on jobs driving taxis, chicken farming, running transport minivans, and engaging in intellectually deadening odd ventures just to survive. Only professors employed as consultants by the World Bank and IMF and Western embassies to churn out report after report of agreed conclusions had it good. The once vibrant University of Dar es Salaam was a sorry sight with greatly diminished output of publishable material. However, we did get every now and then a manuscript from there, but we also maintained contacts with friends all over the world, in the US, in UK, and Europe, where I was able to renew in person these contacts every year for about 10 years, as I attended the annual African Studies conferences, both in US and UK. Now, the lectures and seminars and workshops at these conferences were a way for me to follow emerging issues in African studies, and of course, sharing bread with the best among African scholars, which is obviously very important for a publisher who is engaged in this kind of intellectual production. Keeping contact with friends and other scholars is extremely important. Another source of manuscripts in Tanzania organized institutions which are funded by international organizations and foreign governments. The most challenging project we have so far published is the SADC Hashim Data Project, a comprehensive 9-volume hardcover and boxed edition, Liberation Struggles in Southern Africa, 1960 to 1994, contemporaneous document. This was funded by the Southern Africa Development Community, SADC. It's going to be in English, French, and Portuguese, and the English and French are already out. The Portuguese will be coming out soon. This very major project, of course, has proved our capacity to be able to do such important work and such a big work, to say, because it's a truly enormous effort. Now we have an area of publication that we're touching on is biographies. We published biographies of President Mkapa and Al-Hassan Mwinyi, and we have also published the biography of Mr. Mtei, the first governor of Bank of Tanzania, and other biographies are on the way. Mr. Mkapa's biography was particularly good for our business. We published, we sold 900 copies of the hardcover literally in 2 hours. Now I understand I've got 2 minutes and I haven't even started to say anything. Quite quickly, therefore, we have moved doing a lot of work in Swahili, publishing Shaban Robert, Alf Lela Ulela, this 1001 Nights, and Vutan Kuvute, this incredible novel which has just been turned into feature film and won the best prize at the recent Toronto International Film Festival and FESPAC on Wagadugu. We have published also translations from English, French, Chinese. Le Petit Prince surprised us because we didn't think we would even sell 100 or 200 copies. We have reprinted 4 times and we are getting prizes from Venezuela, so many countries, apparently a collector's item. I'm sorry, I can't go any longer, but let me simply say thank you to everybody. I want to specifically thank African Books Collective and Betty J, because as Issa has said, what they have been doing has been fantastic. Our books are now available on all major databases, thanks to the work that marketing department does. But it's not just simply the marketing and selling, but it has been a center where African publishers could raise questions and get answers about basically all the publishing, documentation, with record research, and so on. So thank you. Let me also thank my family, obviously, Mama Mkuki, and my daughters. Let me thank also Tapiwa, a great friend, a great manager of our company, and so many other people who have, in one way or another, been friends of our company. I'm sure we shall go on, and I hope that we can maintain these contacts. I don't know. I think I've done my time. I hope at some point maybe I'll answer some questions, because I honestly haven't started saying all the things that I would like to say about the 40 years we've been in business. Thank you.
Can't hear you. Oh, I can't hear you.
Professor, you are muted.
Sorry.
Oh, I am.
Okay, sorry. I thank you, Walter. Obviously, you didn't have enough time to say what you wanted to say, but don't worry. At some point, we'll get an opportunity to sit around a table of coffee or wine, and we'll be discussing more. Sasa karibu sana mzee Ngugi. Ndugu Ngugi.
Okay. Thank you very much. But before I start on my memories, I started doubting myself about a book, Walter Rodney's book. You published it, Tanzania Publishing House.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Sorry, I remembered it, and then I sort of started saying, is it, my mind started playing tricks with me. But anyway, thank you very, very much. And I really want to congratulate my brother, Walter Bugoya, for what he has done, the 40 years of publishing. But I have a few other memories I cannot pass this without saying it. Some time ago, I went to Tanzania. I was already in exile. I think it was in the early 80s. And it's a difficult moment in my life. I was under surveillance, so to speak. The Kenya government would have abducted me back to Kenya. They brought pressure on many governments for me to be taken back to Kenya. And that's when I visited Tanzania, right? And I was received incredibly, very well by Walter Bugoya. I mean, it was really incredible because all the time we had to be very careful. But the most important encounter, in a way, the most important encounter was my meeting with Mkuki. Yeah, he was then slightly, he was quite young, really, and we used to play and laugh. And so it was a very, very important moment in my life, really. It's like playing with him and asking questions and all that sort of would make everything, all the pressures under which I was then living, simply vanish. And I enjoyed myself. So I'm so glad to see you again after so many years. I couldn't connect you, the picture I was seeing there, and Mkuki, because when I said Mkuki, always that little young man with whom you used to play, and you remain that young man. You're still very young, but I'm just saying you remain that for all these years. Little did I know that I'll be meeting the one who would be the successor in terms of book publishing to Walter Bugoya. But I remember that moment in my life. It was, anyway, let me not go into it. Yeah, but what I remember is the positive is my being received in Walter Bugoya's house. Yeah, and the family, really, that was incredible. Yeah. Is that by the water what the time you took me to see You know, the Happiness Club? I can't remember. There was a club called Happiness Club also at that time, you know, and that was so wonderful to be in this, in a club dedicated to happiness, right? You know, having said that, let me add another couple of things about memory. I don't, those of us, okay, I'm talking about the publication of 2 books, you know, which were completely sensational, right? You know, well, the first one was Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It was brought about Tanzania Publishing House under the directorship of Walter Bugoya, you know, and that book was really sensational in so many ways, and really made it made Walter Rodney become more of an East African. So that even today I think of him as East African more than he is Guyanese, right? You know, of course there were others that were as sensational as, for instance, the silent class struggle, very, very important. Yeah. Now, but I want to speak about one aspect of your publishing, which I think is so very important. Right from the beginning, Mkuki na Nyota, even as the name itself, which in Kiswahili, Mkuki na Nyota, son and his daughter, but also having this larger significance of Mkuki and Nyota, publishing in Kiswahili, an African language. It's now, after so many years of thinking about the language issue, that the significance of Walter Bugoya and Mkuki na Nyota keep on rising. Yeah. So I don't want to talk about that in a moment, you know. But I remember last night, I had a friend in Canada called Kamonjo Achira. He just called me to talk about his event. And then this morning he sent me even more notes about this event, you know, because he was very excited by this. But what I remember was Kamonji and I, we used to talk about language issues. We were part of an underground movement in Kenya, and we one of the questions we used to discuss was the question of the language question, all right? And the language question has become very, very important. When I think about it, you know, language and colonization, they are so tied together, you know. And now, you know, when I look at the globe, wherever there have been colonies, the language question was paramount, at least modern colonialism, you know. And it went like this: whenever a people colonize another, or say you, they always denigrated the languages of the people they colonized and elevated their own language. Let me repeat this. It's not that teaching their own language is bad, but what was horrifying, and we are reaping the consequences of that, is that teaching their own language was dependent on people being humiliated about their own languages, right? It's as if the knowledge of European languages had to be planted on the graveyard of African languages and colonized languages, right? And this is whether you go to Ireland, you go to Native Americans, you go to New Zealand, Maori peoples, Australia, everywhere. Yeah. Not mention the fact that African languages were banned in this continent of America. so that African enslaved were linguistically disconnected with the continent, while European planters, be it Spanish or French or English, were linguistically connected to the European continent. And so this pattern you'll find it there in all modern colonial situations. And obviously, it was not an accident. Some of them say very clearly that what they wanted to create an African middle class or a colonized middle class who will be bonded to Europe even after, say, independence or self-determination. To tie the mind of the colonized intellectuals to Europe. So that even when it became radical and even progressive, they'll be within perimeters of European languages, right? And I want to make very clear, it is not there's anything wrong in knowing European languages. No. But I want to emphasize that the knowledge of European languages was erected on the denigration of African languages in the case of our continent, right? Elevation of one was humiliation. And this created what I like to be called as abnormality. Because the normal thing anywhere is your own language, then you learn other languages. From your own ground to the stars, right? That's how every journey of knowledge starts, with where you are, with my own body, with my own environment. Then I walk further and I compare what I'm seeing with where I've come from. So I know that's the normal cognitive process. But colonists changed all that. And what we got then was abnormality. And after independence, what we had is normalized abnormality. And today, in the continent of Africa, the system of government, of every education system is based on this normalized abnormality. Because today, African governments all over compete with British government in promoting English language to the complete neglect of the languages of their own countries. Of course, it happens the same thing with the French, the Portuguese. Publishers as well. I'm very proud, I'm very happy that there are African publishers in the continent. When some of us began writing, we used to send a manuscript to English publisher. We didn't even know what they did. We just sent our manuscript to England without even knowing. And we had no copies even. You just sent it to any publisher, right? So I'm very proud of the fact there are African publishers. But what do they do all over the continent? Once again, they compete with European government in promoting European language books, right? We have many languages in the continent. I'll talk a little bit, and if I go over time, please, because please let me know so I don't, yeah. We have many languages in the continent. There is great, economic potential of even many languages. If the government policy were positive. A book published by Mkuki and Nyota in Kiswahili could then be translated and be published in so many African languages And many of the African languages have at least 5 million speakers, more than Denmark, 4 million people. Certainly twice as much as Iceland, which is 250,000 people, a quarter of a million. But they sustain a publishing industry. So you can imagine what would happen to even within East Africa or within a continent. A book is published in Kiswahili or in Kigriama or whatever, then it is translated, published in other languages in the continent. We don't even need to have to sell to Europe to sustain a publishing industry in a continent. But for this, there has to be government policies have to change. African governments stop this continuation of this abnormality. Yeah? It is no future for our continent. We can only have a future of being enslaved to continue enslavement to Europe.
Sorry, Mkuki, I'm so enthralled by what you are saying that I didn't realize that you're going over your time. Can you please wrap up?
Okay, I just want to, because I'm also going in a few minutes. Now, so to me, this is the implication of what Mkuki and Nyota were doing. Emphasize Kiswahili. I know they publish also in English, but they have this base in Kiswahili, an African language, okay? And as far as I know, I may be wrong, it's one of the very few publishing houses which are based on an African language. They may publish in other languages, but they are based, just like there are many publishing houses in Africa which occasionally publish in African languages, but their main base is English. Mkuki and Nyota, I think, was the other way around. So very, very important. By the way, thank you very much for the book by Mwinyi. I'm learning my Kiswahili. I'm using it to teach myself Kiswahili again, or to brush up my Kiswahili here. So to me, that's what the 40 years of publishing Mkuki means to me. And every single day, whenever I think about the language issue, when I see it in Africa, but quite frankly, in all the formerly colonized world, I raise the importance and implications of what you are doing. So you were a visionary. This was 40 years ago, right? right? And you're going strong, yeah. So I really wish many more people are going to copy you. Mkuki, this will be a continuation of the talks you used to have, you and I, okay? So I really wish you all the best. And thank you very much for the 40 years of your input. Yeah.
Thank you, Mkuki. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. That was great. I think we will revisit this during our Q&A. May I now go to Chambi? Chambi, please.
Thank you. I'm really, really happy to be part of this conversation. And my task today is to talk about the role of African publishing houses as producers on knowledge through sustaining knowledge productions and so forth, and setting the intellectual agenda in doing so. And I'll approach it in two ways. Because the history of Mkuki na Nyota centers on the history of Walter Bugoya as a publisher. So I'm going to look at this question through two parts. First, I'm going to look at him as an African intellectual publisher who sets the agenda, or as an agenda setter. And then second, I'll look at the African intellectual publisher as an agenda pacer. In the case of agenda setting, I'm going to focus on two dimensions: co-producing African knowledge and co-disseminating African knowledge. And in the case of agenda pacer, I'm going to look at co-sustaining African agendas and co-defending African agenda. But first, we have to look at the basic of what it means to be an intellectual. A straightforward basic definition is somebody who really exercises their intellectual power to produce knowledge in many forms. So you cannot really be a publisher without being an intellectual. So by that simple, straightforward definition, Mr. Walter Bugoya is an intellectual. Now the question is, which type of an intellectual? A lot of people who have been paying tribute to what he has done classify him as a progressive intellectual. He himself classify himself as a leftist intellectual, as an intellectual who is against neoliberalism and capitalism and so forth. And true to his word, in the 40 years of Mkuki na Nyota, we have seen a lot of published materials that fall into this category of radical leftist scholarship. We've seen, for instance, the publication of the Nyerere lectures under Professor Shivji's professorial lectureship when he was at the University of Dar es Salaam, whereby publications such as the late Samiri Amini's work were published by Mkuki na Nyota. We've seen publications from someone like Abdurrahman Babu, one of the leading leftist thinkers. So in a way, it is truly correct to characterize or classify Mkuki na Nyota and Walter Bugoya as an intellectual publisher who participate in setting the agenda for leftist progressive intellectual politics. And I've used the word core deliberately because it's very easy to center everything on one individual. But as we know, as I said earlier on, you can't be a publisher without, number one, being an intellectual, but number two, you also can't be a publisher without writers and without readers, without people who sell books and so forth. So in a way, whatever Mkuki na Nyota has been doing, indeed, is a work of co-creation. And that's exactly what makes it sustainable. And in doing so, you also have to engage in defending African agendas, especially in regard to some of these literature or publications that were not that popular, especially in the wake of neoliberalism. And another thing that I want to stress on when I'm distinguishing between the term agenda pacer and agenda setter is to argue that even though publishers tend to have a lot of say during the editorial process, during the time when they're advising writers, especially emerging or new writers, we also have a situation where they're also following in the pace that have already been set by others. And the example that I used earlier on about radical leftist scholarship is one of the cases whereby we saw some of the scholars such as Isha Sivji, Karim Hiji, Saida Yahya Othman, and so forth, trying to keep alive that momentum of thinking and publishing leftist scholars, setting that kind of a pace. So in a way, when the publisher comes and support that movement, it becomes very useful, especially at a time when some of the leading leftist or progressive publishers are not functioning, or they're not functioning adequately. For instance, we know what has happened to Pambazuka Press, which was doing a lot of Pambazuka Press and Fahamu, which were doing a lot of good work when it comes to publishing radical progressive leftist literature in Africa in general, but also in East Africa in particular. But now they're basically non-existent or in decline. So in a situation such as this, you need other publishers such as Mkuki na Nyota to keep the fire going on. And another thing that I want to stress on is about what African knowledge is all about. So when I came with my initial framework, arguing that African intellectual publishers engage in co-producing African knowledge when they are setting intellectual agenda and so forth, it's also important to know which form of African knowledge, because in Africa, we are not only producing leftist progressive literature, we also have literature on the other side. We even have right-wing literature, which Walter Bugoya categorically argues that he won't publish right-wing literature as a part of his position as an intellectual. So it's also important to know that there are various strands of position when it comes to African knowledge, but in the case of Mkuki and Nyota, it has indeed been first Pan-Africanist knowledge, international continental, but second, and it's very important for some of us who are coming from Tanzania, it has also been national or local or even global local. And you'll see that over the years, we've had a lot of publications that have been centered on trying to produce, disseminate, sustain, and defend the importance of publishing our own knowledge, whether we call them indigenous or local, and trying to push them so that they can be read widely. So we have the works, for instance, on the Hazabe. We have the work, a publication on the life of the Chaga here in the world and the world to come, which can be characterized as a form of indigenous or local philosophy. And in as much as we've had biographies of former presidents, we've also had biographies of people who are not much known. For instance, a young man called Mikidadi from Mafia, a young activist. We have a historical figure who's not very well known, Mtoro bin Mwinyi Bakari, who's a lecturer in Germany during German colonial times. So through this kind of works, as varying as they are, we can, or I can strongly conclude that Mkuki and Nyota have really managed not only to set the agenda as far as intellectual agendas are concerned, but also to act as pace setters in this kind of production of produce or products of knowledge. And last but not least, when it comes to the other half, I'm saying the other half because I'm a man or a male, Mkuki and Nyota has been very central in publishing and disseminating works and experiences of women, both as activists, intellectuals, and producers of local knowledge. So you can even find books about African local recipes and food, which may not be preserved in print if such a dynamic publisher as Mkuki and Nyota has done that. So on that note, I'd really like to congratulate Mkuki and Nyota. In a way, I have been brought up, and Mkuki and Nyota's predecessor, TPH, my father, the late Professor Chachage, used to work at TPH. I was surrounded by the literature. I read the classical Bibi Bugonoka and Miombekere, classical book from the Kerewe when I was a little kid. It was very big, but I read word by word, even when I didn't understand what was going on. So thank you for all this part of building me as an intellectual. So in a way, you've set the agenda for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chambi. Keep the fire burning. Now, Mary. Mary, please.
Thank you, Professor Shivji. I'm so pleased to be a part of this celebration. And in celebrating Mkuki and Nyota for 40 years, it is, of course, indivisible from celebrating Walter's remarkable publishing history. Publishing is a team effort, of course. But having said that, it is Walter's drive, indefatigable intellectual energy, as we've heard, commitment to his vision of national development, and publishing expertise which has driven the firm. I'm asked to address the digital issues. Much of that development not only informed the development of Mkuki and Nyota, but also that of African Books Collective, ABC. Email in those early 90s was still limited in Africa, and not all publishers were using it to communicate. The internet was still in its early stages, of course, and where it existed, internet service charges were very high and unaffordable to most publishers. Electricity was and remains intermittent, and connectivity was and is not a given. Those assumptions in the North are not as sure as in the South, still. Desktop publishing was in its infancy then, but again, most African publishers couldn't afford computers, software, printers, and related consumables. There were few training opportunities for IT operators. Access to foreign exchange was very difficult, most countries being under rigid structural adjustment regimes and foreign exchange regulations. ABC supported participating publishers, including Walter, by using some of their ABC sales earnings to publish floppy disks, for those who can remember them, ink cartridges and other consumable accessories. Mkuki na Nyota was one of the earliest on the technology bandwagon. Walter was the founding chair of the Grouping of Independent African Publishers, ABC, formed in 1989 to collaborate together on their international marketing and distribution, and to speak in international councils about the position and needs of African publishers. That was for fair play between North and South. Throughout his publishing career, Walters has banged the drum for African publishers. His recognized expertise and endless questioning for ways forward for the industry have taken him to many notable occasions to address the issues. Throughout his chairmanship of ABC until 2017, he both guided the organization, continued international engagement, and interrogated the digital age. Separately, his chairmanship of the unique NOMA Award for Publishing in Africa, with its wide remit of seeking and rewarding notable books from Africa, informed his ability to further African publishers' and writers' interests. Walter was an organizer with the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation of a series of conferences in Tanzania about publishing in Africa. At the 1996 conference, Per Gedin, the preeminent Swedish publisher, introduced the novel technology of print on demand, POD, which was still in its infancy, and advised about its future promise to revolutionize printing and publishing. Some of us were skeptical, but not Walter. By the 1998 conference, he showcased the first POD book produced by a publisher in Africa. He saw the possibilities for the future. His understanding in pursuing the possibilities himself was unselfish, in that he shared his thoughts and experiences with fellow publishers in ABC. He continued to run the conferences with the foundation, always seeking joint ways forward. He cooperated with ABC to run a POD workshop for ABC publishers as long ago as 2003, after his late colleague Victor Nwankwo had run a pilot project of 100 POD titles. His vision then drove the development of his own company and that of ABC. In due course, ABC moved to a model of largely POD and ebooks. In concert with Walter, we embraced the digital age, but have never lost sight of the importance of the physical book, as indeed all evidence is, happily, that the physical book will not die. Walter is, to my knowledge, the only independent publisher in Africa who's purchased the expensive espresso book machine, a big investment. Being a new technology, the EBM was initially more of a liability than an asset. It took more than 2 years before a competent local technician was found, a frustrating and expensive price for going with the most advanced technology. It wasn't tested enough in conditions prevailing in Tanzania and in Africa generally. It is now a resource whereby Mkuki and Nyota can print some, not all, of their published titles in small quantities for local orders and distribution. All the time, Walter, as Mkuki and Nyota, has been interrogating further how the digital age can enhance their work and reach. They're utilising social media platforms with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, showcasing new books, reviews, and events. The TPH bookshop, which is Mkuki and Nyota's sister company, is part of that joint promotion work and a dedicated outlet, as most bookshops stock only textbooks. Walter correctly identifies the points for the future. Affordable EBM type machines located in different countries, so that PDFs are electronically sent for local production, obviating the book postage and the intra-African book distribution problem. The future possibility of affordable and reasonably speedy in-house desktop printers with quality perfect binding capability. He sees IT and artificial intelligence in marketing, sales, and accounting becoming increasingly indispensable if African publishers are to compare with international publishers in an open publishing and bookselling market. I worked closely with Walter over many years, particularly in his role as chair of ABC and mine as CEO. And I can only applaud Walter and Mkuki and Nyota's exceptional engagement with the digital opportunities. From my perspective, I applaud that development of his company, but also pay tribute to the great extent in which it laid the foundations for ABC through his insight and guidance. He has both developed his own company in these ways and contributed greatly through his own work and vision to the wider strengthening of independent publishing in Africa. Mkuki and Nyota is undoubtedly visionary as a publisher, and I salute Walter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that extremely informative presentation, particularly for an author who publishes with Walter but doesn't know how much Walter has been intensely engaged on the issues of publication. Let's now go to our last speaker, Mkuki. Please, Karibu.
Thank you. So I would like to start by giving thanks to Professor Shivji, our chair today, and a dear author of ours. Thanks to all the speakers for your enlightening reflections and for your kind, encouraging, and celebratory remarks about Mkuki and Nyota. We are very, very highly appreciative, and we've been very inspired by your words today. I would like to thank Oxford University and Africa Oxford Initiative for hosting this event. It's quite an honor and privilege to be recognized and celebrated by such an esteemed institution of scholarship. Special thanks goes to David Kerr of Africa Oxford for championing the idea of this series of webinars to commemorate Mkuki and Nyota's 40th anniversary and for coordinate all of us. It's definitely been quite complex, and thank you very much, David. I would also like to thank Mr. Tapiwa Muchechemera, who has been our chief of staff for over a decade and has been instrumental in a lot of progress we've made in the recent years. A special thanks goes to Mama Frida Mariki, an often unsung hero in this publishing house, whom through her financial prudence and ingenuity, we were able to survive some pretty rough times and made sure lights remained on and the salaries were paid in time. I also want to thank our authors who give us the reason for being, and our readers for buying our books and engaging with our work. I would like to thank my colleagues at Mkuki and Nyota. I would like to Mkuki and Nyota, who have inspired me and worked tirelessly to ensure we continue to publish and champion these great books. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. Now we will not be celebrating 40 years had it not been for the community and the solidarity we've been shown by so many people over the years. And I think we've all heard from the previous speakers as well. This community involves many of the people who are currently following this talk on YouTube, and those who will be further watching this talk in its archived version in the future. It is my hope that we're doing you proud and that we will continue to support our authors and their books, and have continued to do so all these years. Asanteni sana. Now on to the 40 years and beyond. First of all, as we move towards the next 40 years, we must remind ourselves why we're involved in books in the first place. And I think we've heard quite a bit today. I think that should remain our guiding star as we look into the future. We should remember that we do this work because it is important towards contributing and nurturing the knowledge ecosystem necessary for the progress of our people. We do this work because we believe in ideas and books which continue to speak and illuminate our experiences, preoccupations, dreams, and delights which are essential first and foremost to ourselves and our allies who engage with us. So it is most important that these works continue to grow and reach our people far and wide within the continent and the diaspora. This is something we've always strived for the last 40 years and will continue to do so for as long as possible because the struggle for liberation is timeless. Now, how do we make sure that we survive and continue this work so that in another 40 years, we can come back here and reflect just like we're doing now? How do we all work towards making sure the African knowledge production keeps widening and thriving in this digital age? How do we make sure that our voices are heard in an ever-increasing noise and filter bubbles created from the dominance of algorithms, which are now dictating which books gets discovered and which books gets read? How do we make sure a book published in Tanzania can easily be accessed in Algeria and a book published in Ghana can easily be accessed in Tanzania, and some in Kiswahili even? But more importantly, how can we make sure a book published in a big city like Dar es Salaam can also be accessed in a rural area like Kasulu? So these are questions we have to continue to ask ourselves and figure out how we keep improving. How can we make sure books published in African languages are easily discovered by readers of those languages in mediums of their choices? Some of these are age-old questions, but will become even more important because as more and more people in our continent migrate to digital mediums, we are faced with tough competition from platforms which were not necessarily designed for us, but still take us as spectators or a pair of eyes and ears to sell for advertising revenue for the big tech companies that own them. So we see all around the world, people are spending more and more time of their waking hours on social media and other digital platforms, whose sole purpose is to sell that attention to the highest bidder, but not necessarily to encourage diversity of ideas and voices. This is just as true for people here in Tanzania and elsewhere in the continent, although the content is not always necessarily relevant to us. However, this is merely the beginning, and we're in the dawn of an even more immersive and potentially more addictive digital experiences offered by the same social and digital media giants such as Facebook and Amazon. Now, African publishers need to be aware of this and ensure that we are present and able to sustain ourselves amid such rapid changes. But how do we do that in the face of what appears to be insurmountable odds? How do we make sure we create enough metadata and information and engagement in order to influence the algorithms in these platforms to serve our content? Should we build our own platforms so our content can be prioritized for those who wish to access it? That's the question. But if so, how do we pool resources to make sure that we have a fighting chance? How does a publishing house such as ours, Mkuki and Nyota, thrive in this environment in these next 40 years? I think when we try to imagine these 40 years, then we'll certainly face these challenges more and more as we progress forward. However, this is something which especially for us who are in this webinar today can do something about many of the, sorry about this. However, this is something that, especially for us who are in this webinar today, can do something about. Many of these challenges, as they also present possibilities for new and inventive ideas for collaboration within the continent and abroad. Some of these opportunities will be afforded by existing technologies, and some we are yet to invent. I think because of digital technology, there is a chance for us to easily collaborate on projects, share editorial and marketing resources, especially in digital mediums, as well as sharing of expertise and training on how to adapt to these ongoing changes. It is now easily to do co-editions, co-publishing projects, and share resources to cut down production and distribution costs significantly. Such collaborations are no longer optional, but a matter of survival and ensuring our autonomy to publish the kind of critical and relevant work in the age where diversity of thoughts and experiences is being muffled in the interest of monetization. If we are to see another 40 years, we need to collaborate with like-minded technologists to develop new tools for getting our content discovered and widely accessed. We need to imagine new mediums and adapt to the ones which are being invented so that we can stay relevant and in touch with our readers, as well as reaching new ones. I think we can endeavor to make African Book Collective play an even bigger part by transforming it into a platform that is powerful as Amazon, but for African published books in both print and digital formats. But anyway, while we are working on that, and since we're in the holiday season, I would like to encourage all of you to buy yourself and your loved one an Africa published book as a gift this year, as it is still the very best place where you can be sure that the authors and the publishers get a fair revenue. Lastly, but equally as important, when we are talking about the next 40 years, we need to remember that we are talking about building and strengthening institutions so that they can continue to exist and serve us for generations to come. Too often our creations live for one, maybe two generations, and then they disappear only for us to start over again to build the same. We have a 40-year foundation of an African publishing house here. Although it is worth celebrating this momentous event, it is still also quite a young institution, which needs a lot of sustaining and nurturing. I think this is something all of us here support in principle, but we can do so much more. We still need to continue to build this knowledge ecosystem and make it more robust to withstand all the rapid changes happening in media today. And we still need more writers, more critics, more book reviewers, readers, and advocates for books, so that reading culture can continue to thrive and grow in our communities. And in return, we can encourage more writing and more ideas to be born and shared. So as we continue to reflect on the next 40 years, these are some of the issues which we need to plan for and the resources we need to mobilize, as well as relationships and collaborations that we need to forge and strengthen. I think indeed it's a beautiful struggle, and I couldn't be more happier to be able to contribute and help answer some of these questions as we move forward. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the next 40 years of collaborating with you all. Asante.
Thank you, Mkuki. Thank you, Mkuki, for giving us glimpses of the next 40 years. Now, before I invite questions, maybe Walter, I'll give you 5 minutes to reflect on some of the issues which have been raised by the panelists, if you want. Walter?
First of all, I really must thank everybody who has spoken so kindly. But I'm also keenly aware that because of the shortage of time, a lot of material is left out of the discussion. Chambi raised some questions about this, the publisher as an intellectual, and setting the stage for intellectual debates and so on. I would like to say, for instance, a lot of the work that I've done has been very much a result of my own reading. and discussions and debates with comrades, especially with the others in Tanzania and so on. But I've always also had very extraordinary opportunities to engage, interact with people outside Tanzania. There are two very key points for me. And these 2 points come in some way from a negative source. You are all aware of this British Lord Mkuki, who in India said that he wanted to produce, in the Indian education was to produce, British education that is, an Indian who was only Indian in color, but in everything else, he was an Englishman. And then he said, in respect of Africa, that he had traveled, had never seen a single beggar in Africa, but that what he wanted now was to arrive to a point where the African thinks that everything foreign is better than his own, you know, and that this man now becomes truly where he's wanted, a subordinate, subjugated person. A couple of things that guide me is this question also of cultural pride, that we have to have a pride of our work, pride in our work, and therefore consistently produce work that we can be proud of. This is very important. Another thing that I think has been important for me, especially in reference to Mkuki's contribution, is that we're now trying to move from where we think Swahili only produces stories. We're trying to move to where Kiswahili also produces monumental works of science and other kinds of knowledge. And to this extent, for instance, we're in the process of producing a over 1,000-page book in Swahili of the anatomy of the human body. We're also doing a big work on the science and politics of nutrition. We're soon to publish a philosophical work on the rights of animals. And we have, in other words, programs to make Swahili an international, also scientific language, because we don't believe that this language should only be for social discourse, but not also engage science, particularly as we know that more and more, unless this knowledge reaches the ordinary people, questions of active development remain discussions at the top, but does not reach the people below. That's something that I would like to emphasize. We have, again, as I say, the opportunity to work with other African people, other African institutions. But this cannot happen also in a vacuum where the states in Africa relegate publishing as some kind of esoteric industry, because fundamentally they do not think publishing has anything to do with education, which is an anomaly. So we have also to engage these governments. We have also to critique these governments. We have also to push these governments. And we can only do that if we are organized, if we cooperate with all those people working in the same direction, so that, yes, the governments in Africa take responsibility seriously of educating the people. Perhaps I should stop there and just hope that, and thank again people who have contributed, and that we are open. One of the things that we have enjoyed, although I must say it's at a cost for me, is that people coming from Dar es Salaam and visiting us, which meant that most of the day I was talking with the comrades, and I only worked at night, which may have speeded my gray hair. But this kind of communication was extremely important, because it is from those conversations that we nourished, our souls are nourished, and that we community, we build the community. I think this is also extremely important, because nothing can be done outside of these communities of intellectual workers. So I think for young people, this is also very important. And I think more important than even our time, because now we get to fight against so many enemies, so many forces that are pulling apart. So it's a work that Mkuki was right to say, please come around again, rally around Mkuki and Nyota so that we can go forward and produce just as much as
Thank
do a
you.
better work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. So I think we have a couple of questions. Zimpande, can you please read out those questions? Can you ask those questions, please?
Okay, thank you all for your very profound and significant reflections. So the first question is for Mkuki, and that question is, what is the future of publishing in Africa in this digital age?
Thank you. I think, well, first we have to continue the work we are doing now. And I think the future of publishing in the digital world is actually migrating to becoming device agnostic, if I can call it that. In that, figuring out how to adapt content in book formats, the traditional book formats, into other mediums, exploring new forms of narratives, exploring new technologies. I was just thinking, you know, how will we read in the metaverse, which is now sort of like the big buzzword, because Facebook has become this sort of pushing this metaverse. How will we be able to find time to engage with African content? Because, and I'm calling it content because when we are migrating to a point where a book is just one kind of medium for disseminating knowledge and content, but there's so many other mediums. So I think the future of publishing in the digital age is seeking stories, seeking relevant content and material which audiences are looking for. And I think there's a huge opportunity there because there's not that much. And to continue to experiment. And lastly, to forge relationships with people in technology as well, and work together to figure this out. It's not really a problem. It's not a question which only publishers can be able to resolve. Thanks.
Next question, Zimpande.
Thank you. So this is the next and the last question for you, Mr. Walter, and we'll be giving you 2 minutes to answer. And after you've finished answering, Issa will take over and then conclude the session. So the question is, there are hardly women-led publishing houses that have managed to succeed for a long time in Tanzania. Why do you think this is the case in the Tanzanian publishing industry?
So why women publishing?
I will repeat.
Yes.
There are hardly women-led publishing houses
Yeah.
that have managed to succeed in Tanzania. Why do you think that is so?
Actually, that's not entirely true. There's one woman-led publishing house, E&D, which is doing very well, and which I would say publishes very good books as well. They're a good publisher. So they've succeeded. I think the question is that they happen to have come, like all of us, at a time when it is very hard, very difficult. And when textbooks in which they did very well have been going through a very difficult time with the government taking over and monopolizing publishing and basically kicking private publishers out. So I don't think that women-led publishing houses have a worse chance than ours. Well, there aren't many, I do agree. But I think that's another question that we could discuss at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. I think that these are only 2 questions, right, Zimpande?
Yes, those are the only 2 questions that we have time for presently. Thank you.
Okay. So let me now say last few words. But before I do so, in response to the first question and Mkuki's excellent answer, I would probably also like to add maybe my orthodox view that we should not take technology to become a determinist. We should not become technological determinist. I think there's also space for book publishing in its traditional sense, and we should really continue to parallel work in this case. And on the question of women-led publishing houses, I think Walter has already answered it. It was END which published Chachagia's novel, Makwadio Soko Huria, a beautiful a novel based on the struggles of the refugee people. And more recently, we know that END published Zohra's biography of a revolutionary woman. So, and as Walter said, they are doing well. And if there are any problems, I think these are common problems for the whole publishing houses. Now, finally, to sum up, but what shall I say? I think we had a very intense points thrown out, and a lot of things to think about and reflect on as we proceed to next 40 years. I would like to take off from Gugi and what Walter said in his final reflections, and that's the question of language. I think Gugi has been emphasizing this for quite some time now. And his basic thesis is, how do you dream in your language, but you are made to think and do in another language? Why don't you think and do in the same language that you dream in? And I think that is a very important process of decolonization. And as he urged, and I'm sure Mkuki and Nyota have taken it on board, that in the next 40 years, we are expecting a very good body of literature, soil literature coming out of Mkuki and Nyota, both literature in its art form, but also scientific literature, also political literature. I think Tanzania is one of the few countries where the political vocabulary is very developed. And I myself found that in some cases, I find that you can make an argument in Swahili better than in English and communicate to the people. And it has resonance. So I'm sure that that will be taken on board. And on that note, I would say that that is the best, which you can do best and which we can give best to our own people. Because usually the kind of division of labor, the colonial division of labor that we have been subject of, the best that we produce is for export, while only the second best is for ourselves. I think we should turn that around. The best should be for ourselves, and the second best should be for export. And here I would like to read it out to you. I hope I can do it well. A poem that Gugi wrote, and which I read only an hour before coming to this session. It is published by Vijay Prasad. I hope I can read it. And that will be the end of our webinar. This is what Mkuki says. First, they gave us their tongues. We said it is okay. We can make them ours. Then they said, we must destroy ours first. And we said, it is okay, because with theirs, we become first. First to buy their aircrafts and war machines. First to buy their cars and clothes. First buyers of the best they make from our best. But when we said we could best them by making the best from our best, our own from our own, they said, no, you must buy from us. Even though you made the best out of your best, now they make us buy the best they've already used. And when we said we could fight back and make our own, they reminded us they know all the secrets of our weapons. Yes, They make us buy the best they have. They make us buy the best they've already used. Secondhand, they call it. In Swahili, they are called mitumba. Mitumba weapons, mitumba cars, mitumba clothes. And now IMF dictates mitumba universities. That really touched me. To produce mitumba intellectuals. They demand we shut down all departments. They say we have to stand on our ground, the best ground from which to reach the stars. But mitumba politicians kneel before IMF, International Mitumba Foundation, and cry out, yes, sirs, we the neo-colonial mimics milk the best bakshish. Mitumba culture creates matumbo kubwa for a few with mitumba minds. With that, I thank you all once again, and I think we have come to the end of our webinar, and let us get away from the mitumba culture. Let us, the intellectuals, not agree to be mitumba intellectuals. Let us do our best for our own best and for our own people. Asante ni sana. Thank you very much. David, over to you.